Guys, John Paulamy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Saturday, June 21st, and this is the weekly market update. The disclaimer, as always, anything that you hear or see on this podcast or video is not to be taken as investment advice. Please do your own due diligence. It's your money, it's your responsibility. Okay, let's get into it. So the big news this week was the Sprott Physical Uranium closing its upsized $200 million bought deal financing. They originally came out, it was going to be 100 million, but there was so much interest that they raised it to 200 million. So here's some snippets from the press release. Sprott, on behalf of the Sprott Uranium Trust, is pleased to announce the closing of its previously announced upsized public bought deal public offering, 11 million units, blah, 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 for 200 million. The net proceeds of the offering will be used by the trust to acquire physical uranium in the form of uranium oxide and concentrate and related fees and expenses. So, to my mind, again, this is very important, right? This is kind of a catalyst, I think, for a resumption of the bull market. Since 2024, about a year, we've seen a pullback of about 50% in the Sprott Uranium Trust value. It kind of broke higher yesterday. Uranium prices surged, futures, spot. And so I think there's renewed interest, right, back into uranium. And this is what we needed to change sentiment, to get prices moving again and get interest back into the sector. Remember, this is a very small sector, so it doesn't take that much capital. And the fact that this was oversubscribed means there's tremendous interest. And this was institutional interest, okay? It wasn't, you know, calling Joe Neckbone from the broker's desk and say, hey, do you want 1,000 shares of this? This was, big money. It got done pretty quick. And so what I'm hopeful is that, there's a 30-day reset now. They can't really do anything for 30 days. They did buy, it closed yesterday on Friday, and they did buy 650,000 pounds. And so, again, a thinly traded market. They're going to be in there buying. And so we'll see what happens in 30 days. But I think that this is going to send, get people thinking again about how much material's really out there. And this is the whole basis of the thesis around this trade that we're on. So you can see this uranium oxide futures chart, it jumped. Basically, this is good news. I mean, it's what you expect to see that's so thinly traded. If you're going to go out and buy 650,000 pounds, it's going to move the market. And I think that, again, this uranium market, as along with the miners and the whole theme, is kind of blown out, right? Sentiment was very low, no interest. Money people sold out and moved away because it wasn't the shiny object. And here we are right back where we ultimately said we would be. So more nuclear news continues to be positive. Greece now is talking about building nuclear reactors. So the Greek prime minister could see the country develop nuclear energy for the first time as part of its energy transition strategy. Goes on to have a quote here. This may come as a shock to some of those listening to us, given that Greece is a country that has no background or experience in nuclear energy. But when I look at the overall energy developments, I see no way for the world to get to carbon neutrality without nuclear. It's interesting that these politicians still talking about carbon neutrality. That's not why they're building nuclear, is because it's the safest, cheap, best form of big power production. That's why. I mean, they can say carbon neutrality because that's popular among the WFE crowd and the Davos crowd, but we're past peak ESG, Prime Minister. Anyways, he also proposed nuclear energy for cutting emissions from shipping, where Greece is a global player. This, of course, is a discussion that I'm very open to have with the shipping community and to ensure that we create a common working group that is going to look at this technology at least as an option. Which is interesting because you have this nuclear military fleets, but again, there would be questions around who would be maintaining it, who would crew it, how would you guarantee the security of the reactors? That's that type of thing. So we'll see. But again, there's just piling brick on positive brick on top of positive brick of the wall of this bull market in uranium. So India came out on the 16th. India plans to buy 4 times more uranium for nuclear energy in a major move to bolster its energy security. India has decided to nearly quadruple its uranium imports by 2033. The decision is part of the National Nuclear Energy Mission, which aims to support the country's growing fleet of nuclear reactors. From 2025 to 2033, the Indian government plans to import at least 9,000 metric tons of uranium in total. Gee, where's it all coming from? Again, we go back to what I've said before. This is a when event, not an if event. Very easily, uranium's going to probably at least double and possibly triple. There is not enough material. There's plenty of material in the ground, but the mines have not been built. The investments have not been made. The permitting has not been done. I did see that Carney up in Canada uh, is putting through some rules and stuff to expedite what they call, projects that are in Canada's national interest, like the big next gen mine and things like that. So it's kind of funny, everybody thought that Carney being elected would be like, Trudeau 2.0, but again, I told everybody he's a neoliberal globalist. He's all about making money. Yeah, he's going to pay lip service to all the environmental stuff and CBDCs and globalism, but when it comes to, you know, you got to, these people are, if you want to call them, be generous and call them pragmatists. They sell out, man. That's just what they're going to do. So, um, I think that that's why I'm kind of positive, a lot more positive than a lot of people are on the Canadian oil sands sector, for example. I don't think he plans on shutting it down. As a matter of fact, the first person, I think one of the first people he met with after he got elected was Adam Waterous of Waterous Capital, who's the major shareholder of Strathcona Energy, which is in the process of trying to acquire Meg Energy and begin the process of consolidating the Canadian oil and gas sector. So Texas goes big for nuclear power. Texas lawmakers have approved the largest taxpayer-backed program to support nuclear energy. Texas legislature passed House Bill 14, which would use $350 million in taxpayer dollars to give companies grants to develop and construct advanced nuclear reactors. Other states have also approved similar programs. So you see the list here: Texas, Wyoming, Tennessee, South Carolina, Washington, Kentucky, Virginia, Ohio. Obviously, Texas is about twice of what Wyoming is, and has the programs here. I'm not necessarily a big, favor, but of taxpayer funds for this type of stuff because a lot of it just gets wasted. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is you have all of this now backing from a government, from the private sector, from the tech billionaires. Everybody is now, it's a complete flip-flop from 2, 3, 4 years ago, where everybody was poo-pooing nuclear power, and now everybody's behind it. It's amazing to the point where there's very few detractors. Some nuts on the far left, legacy, uh, 1960s boomers that are, walking around, but that's about it. So this is a another thing that I found interesting in the big beautiful bill. There's a provision that for U.S. utilities to get the tax credit, there is a tax credit. Value of the credit is zero point 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour or 1.5%. Basically, there's a tax credit for zero emission nuclear power production credits, but there's a provision that disallows the production credit um, where the taxpayer uses fuel produced in a covered nation or by a covered entity. So basically talking about buying uranium from Russia, China, North Korea, things like that, Iran. So this will be interesting because I mean, I don't know how much this is going to be, how valuable these tax credits are, but believe me, having been in the renewable business, there's enough Sharpies and pointy shoes with their spreadsheets figuring out, how valuable these tax credits are, and if it's worth it. I think, they can pass legislation now, but again, it's going to be musical chairs. What if you build a lot of reactors and you still have to go back to Russia to get enriched uranium? I think eventually the investment will come and all these bottlenecks will get solved after the requisite billions are invested. However, I do think that we are going to have a super spike in uranium prices at some point when the music stops and some one or two or how many entities are caught with their pants down and don't have fuel. And so we'll see if this gets rescinded at some point. Um, like I said, things can change. Like I said, 3 years ago, nobody even cared about uranium or nuclear, or people were still poo-pooing nuclear, and now everything's reversed. Everybody wants to build nuclear reactors, yet there's no fuel. So I wanted to show this, I'm not like relying on technical analysis. I've said that before many times. I do look at it though. I found this interesting that you had this declining bullish falling wedge, they call it, since the peak in 2022, the recent peak. And now we've broken out of this. So some people have said, well, anybody can draw crayon lines on these graphs and show what they want to show. I'm just pointing this out. This seems interesting to me. You see the momentum, um, something to watch. We are, is it confirming my bias? Well, you always talk about a super cycle, John. You want it to happen. So you look for things to confirm your bias. I'm just saying this is what's out there. Okay. And it's just another thing to watch. This, continues higher because you could see when you have moves in commodities, they can move greatly. And I do think that we're seeing that across the commodity sector. We're seeing a lot of things starting to move now. And so, gold started this whole thing, and a lot of other metals are coming along now. And we're starting to see activity all across the commodity sector. So remains to be seen. Just another interesting data point. So weak dollar boosting gold, commodities, and emerging markets. So you see the US dollar index has been down tremendously. The gold price has really moved higher during that time, but it was already in a bull market, right? And the reason why, as we've talked about over the last 3 years, it's all going back to the invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions regime put on Russia, and the ongoing sanction regimes by this diminishing empire on all these countries around the world. You either toe the line for the Anglo-Atlanticist hegemon, or you're going to get sanctioned, bombed, what have you, until you comply. And people have had enough. I mean, there was an interesting exchange with George Galloway. I think it was George Galloway and Piers Morgan, and they were talking about Iran. And it was interesting what Galloway said. He saying that Iran has the support of Russia and China, basically 7/8 of the world kind of behind, not necessarily directly, but it's sympathetic to what's going on with Iran. Now, Piers Morgan was like, well, do you really want to associate yourself with all these regimes? And what Galloway said was an important point. You can't disassociate there's 8 billion people in the world. 6 to 7 billion people cannot be dismissed because you don't like their regime or they're living under a regime. And he pointed out, you're sitting over there in London, uh, uh, Piers, and you're under, Keir Starmer, okay, and the nonsense that's going on there, or the people in France with Macron, or the whole EU project. We must kill free speech to save free speech. And you can go on, with the elections. I guess it just depends on your frame of mind and how you look at things, And me, I look at it as I try to, I've said this before, it doesn't cost you anything, and it probably would benefit you is if you don't adopt a rigid view on everything. And when you're in a conflict or you're in a negotiation or you're in a dispute, what I was taught when I was in the bargaining unit, we had training about negotiation. You don't have to agree necessarily with the other party. Obviously, you're in a dispute, so you don't agree, but you should at least understand what the other party, what their framework is, how they're thinking about the dispute. Put yourself in their shoes and how they may be looking at it. That doesn't mean you have to agree, but at least you'll understand or have some idea of what they're trying to achieve. To just be rigid and say, do what we say or else, isn't going to work anymore. That would work post World War II framework worked like that because we were so dominant. We're not dominant economically, politically anymore in the world. It's just not going to be like that. We're going to a multipolar world. As these countries developed economically and closed the gap with the US in wealth, they want more influence. They want to be heard. Okay. You can't just dismiss all these people, 7/8 of the world's population anymore. And so if you're going to sanction and bomb and intimidate, then people are going to say, you know what, you do have the reserve currency. It is a reserve currency. You're still economically powerful. You still have this huge military, but we're going to slowly but surely wean ourselves away from that. And the way they're doing that is via gold. Okay. Um, and and not participating in buying US debt. That doesn't mean the dollar is going to collapse. I'm not a Schiffite, Peter Schiff guy that every day I'm out here, the dollar is going to collapse. The dollar is going to be around for a long time. The US is going to be around for a long time, but it's in slow decline. The air is leaking out of the tire. Okay. And, I don't see any reversal. I see as we are starting to lose our hegemon and as people that are participating or are anchored to it, like our friends in Israel, they see that and people are going to get more desperate. Okay. Because they see the power slipping away, the wealth slipping away, the influence slipping away. And that's how I view it. And I think that, with the debts that we have, with this entitlement crisis that's coming rapidly at us like a tsunami, like the poor economic decisions that we're making, like the internal conflicts and contradictions we have in our own country, it's not, in my view, a environment that's going to lead to a strong dollar. I think over time, the dollar is going to get weaker and weaker over time because of the debasement of the currency and all these other things that are going to be happening, internal contradictions. But, and I think that's going to lead to a higher gold price. So how high? Who knows? But a lot higher than it is now because these central banks are remonetizing gold. They're making it their reserve asset. It says right here, the US dollar is historically unpopular right now. But you can see back in these periods, we've had this spike down that's similar to where we saw in back in January of 2005, but it can stay, okay, under, people can be negative on it for several years. This could not just be a spike and, I'm not saying it's straight down, but it can be, we could have a rally. It's oversold right now. Maybe it rallies, then buying continues because you're going, I don't see any way you get around having to print trillions and trillions of currency units to deal with the debt. It's interesting. You're seeing more and more of these big hedge fund managers now, people that benefited from the financialization of the economy over the last 20 or 30 years. I just saw Paul Tudor Jones on CNBC the other day, or a clip of him talking about this exact issue. Ray Dalio. Okay, all these big money managers that benefited from low interest rates and low inflation, the post World War II liberal New World Order, and now they're all saying this. They're all singing the same thing. Almost embarrassingly, they don't want it to be like that, but they can. Everybody can see it, and if they can see it, can't the Chinese see it? Can't the Russians see it? Can't the Saudis see it? Why would you want U.S. Treasury debt? We are not responsible in managing our debts and our economy. So there you are. Why would you want to hold dollars? Why wouldn't you want to at least diversify somewhat? If you see the country running the debts that we're doing and the entitlement crisis and deficits of 5 to 7% or higher ad infinitum to add to the already debt, that's not an indication of a country that's being responsible. That's just going to kick the can down the road. Why would you want to hold that debt? At some point, you put that one treasury bond on the camel's back and it breaks the camel's back. Is that at 40 trillion? Is that at 80 trillion? Is that at 150 trillion? I don't know. But I know that they're going to have to print a lot of currency units at some point to pay the interest. And, you know, it's going to get bad. And that's why you're seeing hard assets for the next decade at least being, I think, in a position to outperform financial assets. Watch the 10-year treasury. It hasn't broken out yet. We're still under 5%, like on the 10-year, but watch it. At some point, you have to sell this debt to somebody. And if rates go to 5, 5.5, 6%, well, you think the housing market's bad now, just wait. Congratulate yourself if during if you were able to pick up a 30-year mortgage at 3% back in the day. That's why you're not seeing a lot of people selling their house. Why would you sell your house? You have a $450,000 house with a 3% mortgage on it for 30 years. If you sell it, as you bought it, it's up 150 or 200,000 since you bought it. What are you going to buy next? Another $500,000 house, but this time with a 7.5 or 8% mortgage? That makes no sense. So this is what we've talked about before. This is what Lynn Alden's talked about before, some other folks, Russell Napier. We've been here before. After World War II, the debt to GDP was 125 to 130% of GDP after World War II. And so what did they do? They ran negative real interest rates. Okay. You cap the long bond at say 3.5, 4%, and you run inflation at 5, 6, 7% for several years or higher. Okay. And so the economy, GDP expands because of, the nominal rate because of the inflation, but yet you you use yield curve control and basically you steal money from the bondholders. You cannot be, except for as a trading sardine, you cannot hold long-term bonds until you see some massive change in the thinking and the actions of the U.S. government relative to the debt and the attitude towards dealing with this. You can't hold U.S. debt as an investment. In short-term treasury bills, okay, but you have to be in this environment. In my mind, I'm slowly adding capital to hard asset positions when I have the opportunity to buy things on a dip because I just don't see anything. You have to be able to stay ahead of that inflation. You certainly don't want to be in treasury bonds, long-term bonds, where they're just going to pay you. If you buy a $10,000 treasury bond, you can go to the treasury website. They have an online, you can buy them online. And you buy a $10,000 10-year bond at 4.5%, you'll get your 4.5% interest. And they'll pay you $10,000 in 10 years. But what's that $10,000 going to be worth in purchasing power? That's what a lot of people don't seem to understand. So we've seen this before. This is a tremendous environment where you have negative real rates for gold, commodities, emerging markets. Is tremendous for they will tremendously benefit. So we'll see if we see this again. Right now, it's interesting because central banks are driving the gold price. But at some point, because real rates are actually positive right now, and that's typically not good for gold prices. But yet gold's making new highs because, like I told you, everybody's front running the inevitable monetary debasement, in my view, and just getting sick of the whole way the U.S. is acting as its empire slowly deflates. And it gets more and more vicious and unpredictable and chaotic, trying to hold on to this hegemon, which it has benefited. We've benefited from being the hegemon in post World War II neoliberal world order. I mean, quite frankly, so why wouldn't they want to hold on to that? Our whole financial system and a large part of our economy is based around that system. And so the people that are the establishment who are benefiting from it, that control it, that gain power and wealth from it, they're not interested in letting it go away. So they're going to fight tooth and nail. So this is where I want to be investors hold very little energy in their portfolios. It's almost like, going back 20 years, we're at record low amounts of people holding energy stocks. This is where I want to be. Now, do I think energy is going to outperform in the next week, month, 6 months? I don't know, but I think over 3 to 5 years, I think oil and gas, things like that are going to outperform. And at some point, they're going to become overweighted as part of this uh, commodity super cycle we're going to have. And this super cycle is not going to be based on necessarily demand. It's going to be based on lack of supply because of underinvestment is endemic across the resource sector. You look at sector after sector, lack of investment, lack of long-term planning because it just wasn't popular. You couldn't get the money, prices were down. Why do it? Classic supply and demand. And so, enough money will probably come into it if prices go high. People have asked me, well, how high do you think oil can go? I don't know. Why can't it make no new real uh you know just inflation adjusted highs, 200, $250 a barrel? Why not? $300 a barrel? Why not? Again, I think we've shown this before. This is from Tavi Costa, Crescat Capital. Energy sector as a percent of the S&P 500. It's at one of the lowest points it's been in history. Okay. Do I think that energy sector is going to get to 30% of the S&P like it was in 79, 80 in the heyday? I mean, I had an interview with Ben Kelleran the other day. He interviewed me, and I was talking about this when I was a teenager, 13, 14, 15. And I remember this. I remember how dominant energy was, the energy sector was, how it just dominated the financial press and all the things that were happening, and the mergers and stock charts that you see in stock chart books from the lower left to the upper right. And but I definitely think why can't we get back to 13% or 16%? The historical seems to be anywhere from 13 to 18%. So we have a long way to go just to get back to what's been, you know, and think about this. When you get to these extremes, you mean revert. When you mean, you don't just stop here at whatever the mean is, which is probably right around in here, right? 16, 17%, something like that, right? You always undershoot. It's the same thing. After you overshoot to the downside, you typically, as you go back to whatever the mean is or the average, you overshoot on the upside. So I think that, if I can buy things, like I've said before, I really like what's happening in the Canadian oil sands. You can buy cheap assets that are going to get consolidated down to three or four, probably operators, 40, 30, 40, 50-year reserves, low cost, all the capital investment's been made. It's just operating capital, maintenance capital, and you just enjoy cash flows. And it looks like Carney is, open to building pipelines to the coast to get more of that oil out of there. So I don't need oil production to go up there. I just need them to continue to cash flow, pay down debt, and you know, return money to me via buybacks. And I can get an S&P, I can get a return that's going to beat the S&P. And then if oil prices kick, and that's at current oil prices. That was that was that was even true at $65 a barrel. What if we go to 100 or $200 a barrel? Then I have that optionality for that move, and I probably get a tremendous capital gain also. So this is how I think about investing. Okay, is this something that's going to happen the next week? No, these things take time, take years to play out. But I'm still getting cash on cash returns with dividends and buybacks that are probably going to beat the S&P over the next 10 years. So we talked about central banks. This is from US Global Investors. Record number of central bank the gold reserves increasing over the next 12 months. So let's go back to before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and all the sanctions regimes. 2022, go back before that. You had, you know, 54, 52% of banks increasing their gold reserves. You actually had in 2021 and 2022, 5% of the central banks were decreasing their gold reserves. And so after the invasion, now as we see the um, fiscal fiscal irresponsibility of the U.S., slipping of the empire from its grip, the increasing chaotic foreign policy, uh, the realization that, the emergence of the global South and East, you're seeing more and more central banks are talking about increasing up to the point of in 2025, 95% of the central banks in the world are going to increase their gold reserves. Only 5% are going to remain unchanged. What does that tell you? This is like, you should, this is what we've been doing, front running this. And retail and institutional money hasn't even really come into this market yet. That's what's so funny. So investor capital hasn't come in yet. This is all just central banks realigning their reserves that got out of whack by holding so many US treasuries. Now that's reversing because of how we're acting with our foreign policy. People don't want to have all of their assets in the US or tied to the US. So if they do something that's in their they feel is in their country's interest, but the US doesn't like it, they get sanctioned and their money gets confiscated. Why would you do that? So this is what you're seeing. This is what we've been talking about. This is a tremendous slide. Understand what's going on. And this is just going to happen in gold. This is going to be increasingly happening in Bitcoin, in my view, now that it's legitimized as a real asset. So congrats, America. You crossed 37 trillion in debt. This happened in the last day or so. Look, I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what your political persuasion is. It doesn't matter. There's two certainties going forward. You're going to get more debt and more war, whether you like it. It doesn't matter if you vote for a Republican or a Democrat. You're going to get more debt and more war. That's it. That's a certainty. It's a uniparty. Okay. And tell me I'm wrong. Okay. We'll see over the next couple days or weeks or so, because we don't know what's going to happen, what this president's going to do, because he's got himself in a box now. On one side, he has this tremendous lobby from this junior partner that's part of this hegemon. You understand that Israel is the hegemon's outpost in the Middle East. Okay. The Atlanticist hegemon in the Middle East. Okay. So it has to be supported. Not only that, you have tens of millions of dispensationalist evangelical Christians in the country that believe that Israel's instrumental to the second coming of Christ. Then you have, you know, neocons who want war. They love war. They want war. The John McCain wing of the government that constantly wants war. The defense contractors. Who are who's calling for peace? A couple of people, some America First people, and so you're going to get war. Every president you get war with, and every president you get more spending. That's a certainty. So this goes up. So I ask you, is it 40 trillion where this thing breaks? Is it 50 trillion? Is it 100 trillion? I don't know. It's unknowable. But I can tell you this is going to become a problem. This is going to, every day that goes by, you get closer and closer to the breaking point. And this is why, in my view, you have to be in hard assets because there is only one way out of this. They're not going to cut spending. They're not going to pay back the debt. That never happens in real life throughout history. What does happen is they get to the point because they want to continue with the bread and circuses and the wars and the spending and all the other things. Okay. And so they'll start printing the money, whether it was shaving coins in Rome or Weimar hyperinflation, however you want to look at it, all throughout history, you can read time after time how this goes down. You just watch declining empires. This is the key to their downfall. And so I think you have to own things that can't be created out of thin air. because what other currency are you going to go to? This is why gold, that's why Ray Dalio called gold a currency. And he was laughed at, he was snickered at. I showed the video many times when he was at the Council of Foreign Relations, by the way. This is the guy that's billion-dollar hedge fund manager, billions of dollars under management, very successful, saying, yes, I own 10 to 15% of my personal portfolio in gold. He said this many years ago because, and then they were all snickering. And he said, wait a second. Gold's a currency. It competes with the dollar, the yen, the euro. And if you don't own some gold in your portfolio, you are ignorant of history and economics. And so this is, you know, I'm going to keep putting this up. You know, by the end of the within a year, you're going to be close to 30, $40 trillion, 39, $40 trillion. Then you're going to be at 43, and then you're going to be at 45. I mean, it's not going to end. And then the entitlement tsunami is now coming ashore with all the baby boomers. It's not just symptomatic to the US, it's the entire Western OECD countries. They've made these politicians made promises. We deluded ourselves here as voters that we could have something for nothing. And that math doesn't apply to us because we're exceptional. Well, you're going to find out that we're not exceptional. Doesn't mean I hate America. Math is math. You can't have, when you start a program, have 30 to 40 workers supporting a retiree that doesn't live even to 70, down to now two workers supporting a retiree, and the person lives till they're in their 80s. It doesn't work. And again, that's what's going to swamp this thing. That and the interest costs. If they could get down to the zero bound again, they could probably buy themselves 10 years. But we're at like, as you're rolling all this debt, it's getting rolled. We've already seen, interest is going crazy, spiking. It's the third largest budget item. It's like the person that makes minimum payments on their credit cards, yet keeps spending. At some point, it ends. So this is part of the political stuff. I should have warned everybody. I'll take a sip of coffee if you don't like, because I'm going to get into more stuff about Israel here in a minute. And if you're not somebody that particularly cares for my views on these things, you should probably decouple now. So this is problems I want solved. It says here the average U.S. family health insurance premium in 2000 was 6 grand. In 2024, it's 26 grand. Okay. So that's a 342% increase since 1991, 6.1% per year. Note, US CPI inflation has increased 2.5% a year. Remember Obamacare? It's going to lower your premiums. You can keep your doctor. It was nothing but a sop to the insurance companies. And we hear horror story. Now remember, people will be like, well, that's a lot. I don't pay 26,000. Yes, you do, because your employer pays most of this. Okay. And that's money that should be going to you as wages. So we have this, as my wife calls it, this mafia here in the US, this medical mafia. Okay. These insurance companies mafia. And guess why it's like that? Because they lobby and give money to politicians. See, the politicians are there or should be there to be in getting this under control. They don't have to have socialized medicine. They don't have to do anything. What they need to do is cut out the anti-competitive. My wife is from Ukraine, as most of you know. And I remember when she first came here, she could not understand how insurance worked and co-pays. It took a lot of time and effort for me to explain this to her. And she immediately recognized it as a scam. It wasn't even, so this is a mafia. But you got to do what you got to do. So she wanted to get an ultrasound. Well, if you're in Ukraine, you go to the polyclinic and they have this multi-story, 4-story building, like a little campus, and you have your general practitioner and you say, well, go up to the second floor. There's an ultra thing. You pay $20 or whatever, get the ultra scan, bring the thing back down. The guy looks at it. You're in and out of there in a few hours. Okay, that's how it's set up. Cash and carry, basically. It's relatively cheap. Okay. And I've been there many times and had medical care. I didn't have any problems with any of the medical care. And if you have cash, you go right to the front of the line. And it was relatively cheap, clean, efficient. I didn't have any problems with it. People are educated, they know what they're talking about. I had one medical condition that no one here in the US could seem to deal with, and I was dealing with a practitioner there, and they helped me out a lot with my situation. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get advanced cancer care there and things like this, but I will say this, that my wife has a condition, uh, and she gets, even during the war that she's over there right now, she gets, she has a certain form of leukemia that can be treated with a drug that in the U.S. costs about $10,000 to $20,000 a year, and she gets it for basically no cost, and basically shuts this particular gene off, and lowers all of her markers for this particular disease that chronic disease that she has, of a certain leukemia. Okay, that's what we need in the U.S. We need competition. So the story is, you go to get an ultrasound here, and she goes and she says, "Well, how much is this going to cost?" And they're looking at her like she just came in from Pluto or something. "What do you mean, what's it going to cost? You have insurance, there's the copay, and that's it." She goes, "No, I want to know how much it's going to cost." Can't get the price. So if you go into Arby's or Wendy's and order a combo meal and you don't know the price, "Hey, I wanted that number 4 spicy chicken sandwich, large size, biggie size, and a small chili on the side," and they don't have the prices, and all of a sudden they put it in front of you, and it's like, "Okay, your bill's $294." I mean, no one's going to go for this in any other environment. Okay, but they've conditioned people, partly here in the US, that there's a third party that's going to take care of all this. And so these mafias have gotten us to the point where I've seen many TikTok videos and Twitter videos of surgeons, doctors that have to get on the phone and argue with the insurance company to get their patient a treatment that is technically authorized under the insurance, but some bureaucrat who's not even a doctor is at the insurance company refusing to authorize, and all these other little games that they play. And so instead of passing legislation to increase competition, to make pricing transparent, to do things like this. I mean, I like what Mark Cuban's doing. I'm not a big fan of Mark Cuban's politics, but this generic drug thing that he started, he's collapsing drug prices for a lot of people. Okay? That's what we should be doing across the board. Things like that. Innovation, competition. Okay? This is why when you live in South Texas here and the snowbirds come down from Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota, they go across the border to Progreso Nuevo, and the first thing you walk across, you see pharmacies and dental clinics. Well, I would never get my teeth cleaned in Mexico. Why? The guy was educated at Texas A&M. You go in there, get same day service, cash and carry. What's the problem? Go over there and get the drugs. Well, they're all counterfeit. No, they're not. If you go in some sketchy one in the middle of town, that might be something. But right at the border, it's a real business, and the drug costs are extremely cheap relative to the U.S. People go over there. That's what they do. That's what these winter Texans do. Competition. But instead, we've created this mafia here with the insurance companies and the medical establishment that has inculcated itself, fused itself with the politicians who strip mine the average U.S. worker. That's what I want dealt with. I don't want any more military adventures. I want problems like this dealt with. And the solution is socialize and make it single payer. The solution is to create competition, take out anti-competitive monopolies, and get rid of the money in politics that allows the lobbying so they can create these mafias. If you want to know what real fascism is, the healthcare system in the United States is fascism in the Italian sense, where you have private corporations fused and Brundleflied melded with government, and this is what you get. All you people that voted for Obamacare, I knew this was going to end up this way. It was always going to be a sop to the insurance companies. Look at the price, look at and then you wonder why, that nut took out the CEO of United Healthcare. Frustration. It boils over. Who represents the average person? Not your legislators. They're in the pocket of whoever gives them money. I've just described this many times. This is not cynical or blackpilling. This is the way it is. What do you think all these people are doing up there? They go in as some sterno bum wearing the suit, the pants from one suit and the jacket from the other one, come out, a centimillionaire after 40 years. How do you think that happened? Can't get them to pass a rule or a law that they can't trade stocks on companies that may be involved in legislation that they're getting ready to pass. So what do? They front run, buy the stock, and then pass legislation that's positive for the stocks that they own. If you did that, you'd go to prison. A consummate insider. Yet, and it's both parties, people. Stop falling for the big game. We got to go in for the blue team or the red team go in for the big score, the big touchdown. You know, in the meantime, you're being strip mined. You know, 30%. I mean, copay. You shouldn't. How many times have you seen it where somebody said they went for medical care? I've seen this many times on TikTok, just like my wife's experience. Go in for some procedure. They're charging the insurance company or Medicare $1,000 and it only costs 200. I want to pay cash 200. You're not allowed because you have insurance. It's rigged. It's a mafia. This is what America First should be concentrating on. Instead, we're getting ready to kick off another Mideast war. How does that benefit anybody that's getting bent over and butt raped by the insurance companies? This is just one thing. This is just one facet. There was another one I didn't put up about how much it costs to operate a vehicle in this country with the rules and regulations and the fees and the licensing fees and the taxes and blah, blah, blah. Just strip mine you. Why is it after you pay off your house and you've worked for 40 years and you're in your 60s, why do you still have to pay property tax? Well, John, we have to do this or your inability to think of a way to build roads and get kids educated because you're not smart enough to figure it out, that doesn't mean that we should all pay big taxes and have these huge bureaucracies be strip mine. This is what the majority of people want dealt with. And they're begging, they're hoping that somebody's going to come along and deal with this and actually represent their interests. But these people don't represent your interests. So let's talk about our next foreign adventure here in the Middle East for our little brother Israel, which I don't really like I've said before. Israel exists. It's going to continue to exist for some period of time. Um, I'm not going to get into all of the history and religion. It's there, okay? And the country exists and they're going to defend themselves. Okay. But that doesn't mean I have to be involved in it and have my money spent on that. Okay, we're already $37 trillion in debt. It's increasing at 2 trillion a year. We're getting anywhere you turn, you're being bent over and strip mined of your wealth like a medieval serf. Okay, and yet we're going to start another war with some entity over there that we've already spent $20 trillion in 30 years removing its enemies. Not interested in doing it. If that makes me an anti-Semite, then I'm an anti-Semite. Not interested in doing it. Okay. Don't care. Doesn't affect me. Could care less. And so here's I follow a guy on uh Substack, Simplicius the Thinker. He's been very prescient and very good on the Russo-Ukrainian war. That's something you don't hear anything about anymore because Israel always takes precedence, but that's for another discussion. But he's been very so then he's weighing in on this now, and a couple quotes from his recent article. I'll put a note, uh, a link in the show notes. It's a subscription. You have to pay for this guy's stuff, but he puts out a lot of content, and he's usually more right than wrong. And obviously, if you're a Team America, you're not going to like this what he has to say or the other person I'm going to quote. But I think these people are pretty prescient and pretty spot on what they're saying. So um, I put here, there's always another enemy. And so what does he say? He says, this is from his article. Simplicius the thinker. Israeli figures and media are already salivating at the prospect of what's next after Iran, with various posts about Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan all being lined up for disarmament and dismantling. Israel likewise continues begging Trump to, quote, finish the job, unquote, as if the plan all along was merely for Israel to, quote, open up the gates for U.S. firepower. And of course, that is the case. Israel never had the endurance to go 12 rounds with Iran, and the hope was always that the US would step in, which is why everything now depends on Trump and his tiny cohort of string pullers. But again, judging by Iranian defiance, Iran does not seem in a particular hurry to genuflect to the empire. This can only mean that Iran likes its chances and may not have suffered as much attrition thus far as claimed. Or it could be like, Baghdad Bob with Iraq. I mean, we cannot know for certain because there's such a fog of war. There's so much propaganda from both sides. You're not going to know until this thing resolves. Okay. Um, but this is exactly what's going on. I mean, you have a situation now, okay, where Trump comes in, America first. There was an agenda. We've talked about the economic agenda. That's what people are concerned with dealing with immigration. That's what people were concerned with. And now we have no more wars. Remember when Trump first ran the first time, how he dissected Jeb Bush on the dais about the Iraq War and the disaster it was, and Jeb's brother George Little the Shrub and that disaster. And that was something that propelled him to the top of the polls. People in this country don't want any more foreign wars. Yes, the polling shows that the majority of people in the country think that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. Okay. But the majority of people don't want to have an armed conflict with Iran. And we had a situation where we had it negotiated where the Iranians were compliant. They were not enriching uranium. President Trump canceled that agreement and it's enriched to 60%. I don't know why. And then they said, well, then Israel decided to go for it, and here we are. Okay. And so the day before the negotiations, a sixth round of negotiations last weekend, we're supposed to start last Sunday in Oman. Israel goes in and starts this conflagration with the expectation now that the U.S. is going to come in and do this. I will tell you that if the U.S. does this, the MAGA coalition splits. It's the end of his presidency, and then you're in another war. And here again, Syria was an example. I don't think that the Russians and the Chinese. I mean, Pakistan has said very simply, if the Israelis use a nuclear weapon against Iran, they will nuke Israel. You see how this thing can get out of control. Now, that may just be rhetoric. Does the average person understand all of this? Does people understand that you're not dealing with Afghanistan or Syria here? This is a real country. It's been around for a long time with 90 million people. It's a huge country. Lay it, do a cutout of it, lay it over Europe or the US. It's huge. You're not going to get regime change, or even if you degrade this nuclear program, which they say is the goal, it's just going to get reconstituted. So what are you trying to achieve here? How do you get regime change? You're not going to put boots on the ground. So I don't see how they can go this. Now, on the other side, Trump's under a tremendous amount of pressure because a lot of his uh, support came from very wealthy Jewish pro-Israeli backers. It's just that simple. And that's how politics works. People give you money, they expect you to do what they want done. And so he has that. He has the neocons that are part of that uniparty. He's got people in his own party that want to do this. Lindsey Graham, Mike Pompeo, his former Secretary of State in the first administration. He's disregarded. He gets Tulsi Gabbard in there. She has all of the real-time information as a director of national whatever intelligence, and he disregards her publicly. She should resign immediately, okay? Or her brand is over with. If we attack Iran and she doesn't resign, then there you go. That's another sellout. But these people, when they get there, man, they just like cross through a membrane and just get so infected. So Hez gets the same way. He doesn't want to attack. So you have this competing smaller and smaller group of people around the president who doesn't evidently listen to the security apparatus or the intelligence apparatus informing him. He listens to Fox News, evidently, or whoever whispers in his ear last, or calls from Miriam Adelson, telling him that, me and Sheldon gave you $200 million. We want this dealt with. Plus, I mean, just go to Washington, D.C. Have you ever been there and across the river there? I think it's Alexandria or Arlington. You can't build like skyscrapers there in D.C. proper. But you go across the river there, and there's all these huge, you know, 10, 20-story buildings with all of the defense contractors' emblems and, signs on them. Okay. You understand how this works? There's all these competing. It's not just like one, you know, a couple people in a room. There's a lot of competing interests. This under tremendous pressure. And I think he understands, you know, uh, what could happen. If people, the whole MAGA thing, most of the MAGA crowd doesn't want, this is not America first. This is not what people wanted. And so I don't know what's going to happen. Impossible to know. This guy's very unpredictable. He says one thing and does the exact opposite the next day. Who knows? But this is kind of like, we'll just have to see how the information comes in. I've said that before. I don't know what's going to happen. It's impossible for me to know. I'm not a military expert on these things. I don't even know all of the string pullers and all of the players. But I will say that I think that it's pretty plain and obvious to me that MAGA coalition would collapse, split in half, and presidency's over if he does this. And then if he gets involved with this, if they can't get it done, then what? Okay, what if we're going to be doing? We couldn't even remember. They couldn't even finish off the Houthis. Remember those guys in Yemen? They're still running around launching missiles at people. Okay, I mean, guys. I mean, you want to get in the ring with these people. I mean, as Doug Casey said, for 25 years, I've heard him say this about Iran. You're screwing around with Syria or Afghanistan or these rinky-dink countries. If you go after Iran, now you're hunting big game. These people have, you should read the article from Simplicius. He gets into it. They have manufacturing base for their missiles. They make missiles. They're making 200 to 300 a month. They're ramping up. They're going on a wartime footing. They're getting support from Russia. They're getting support from China. They're going to continue to get support. I mean, this is how you get this World War III situation. I don't think that's a high probability, but you see how things could move. And Israel's getting desperate because it has a lot of problems also. It knows that once the boomers in the US are dead, there is no support for Israel in the younger generations. There's certainly no support for Israel in the global South and East. And so they got to make their moves now while they still have the boomer support, while you have a boomer president, while you still have the support and money flowing in because they have demographic problems. They're surrounded by people that are out producing them population wise and internally in the country. It's just a big mess. And so you have this certain ideology that for a greater Israel that seems to be one of the factions that seems to be in power there now. There's a lot of things going on that the average person doesn't even know about. Okay. And then you have, media here. You never get the real story. You're never going to get the real story. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's important for investments because if the US goes after this, I mean, can they get it done? Okay. What if you shoot down one of these $2 billion bombers, stealth bombers? What if a hypersonic missile hits the USS Nimitz that's on its way over there and sinks it? And then they pick up, a couple thousand sailors out of the water and march them through downtown Tehran as prisoners of war. I mean, you can think of all kinds of scenarios how this thing could just get, is Iran just going to sit back and say, okay, well, you wanted it, you got it. We're going to light the whole place up. We're going to, people say, well, they can't close the Strait of Hormuz. Well, they can release a bunch of mines. They can do all kinds of things. Already, I think it was one of the shipping companies has already said that it's suspending any more shipping traffic into there because it's too dangerous. You would see, I think, insurance rates skyrocket. You could do it without doing it. And then do you amp it up, then say, well, you need to back down, Iran, or we're going to destroy Karg Island. Okay, then you blow up the oil facilities at Targ Island and take, 1.5 million, 2 million barrels of oil exports off the world market the next day. What happens then? And you've disrupted the supply out of the Gulf from the UAE and Saudi and Kuwait and these things. Okay, then what? So, what does that do to the presidency of Donald Trump? I've said this before. I said it on the interview today. It's not going to get people's attention here in the U.S. until if it gets out of control and gas prices go to $6 to $7 a gallon spike. Then people will be going, "Hey, how did this happen? I thought we were, drill baby drill. Oh no, we decided to have a war for another country's benefit, and it blew up in our face." And oil prices are $150 a barrel and gasoline $6, $7 a gallon in the summer driving season. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. It's impossible to know. But uh, you know, his presidency, based on the decision that's made, his presidency could be over if it goes the wrong way. And maybe it's a success. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all the people in the Defense Department, the CIA, and MI6, they've got it all worked out and the plan will go. But I know from warfare, the history of warfare, that nothing ever goes the way it's planned. Unforeseen things happen. You get on an esca escalation ladder. You can control what you do, but you can't control what your opponent's going to do. So one more thing to say here. This is from a guy I follow. I'll put a link to the article. Guy named Vox Day. A lot of people don't like him. They think he's a white nationalist and a racist and a homophobe and all this stuff. But I found a lot of his comments to be prescient also on some of these things. And he's talking about what I've just talked about. So there's a couple blurbs from what Vox Day had to say. If President Trump does attack Iran, it will be the biggest mistake of his life, and he will lose the greater part of his support even before he loses the war. He will certainly lose mine. Remember, there are no guarantees that the U.S. plus Israel can defeat Iran alone. All it is, and it is all but certain that the two, quote, greatest allies cannot defeat a broad alliance of Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, Russia, and China. There are far too many possibilities to make any substantive predictions or attempt to estimate probabilities. But I will say that if the U.S. wages war on Iran and Iran's prospective allies follow suit, the probabilities would favor an eventual military defeat, and among the possibilities would include A, complete destruction of Israel, and B, the collapse of the USA as a singular political entity. If I were Trump, I would follow George Bush the Younger's example. Declare mission accomplished regardless of the realities of the situation, and allow the Israel-Iran conflict to gradually return to its previous low simmering hostilities. The fact that no ground invasion of either side is currently possible renders that the optimal outcome under the current circumstances. So I think that's probably, uh, I don't find a lot of fault in this. Again, uh, it's impossible to make predictions. We'll just have to see how things transpire, how events go, and we'll just have to pivot as necessary. I've made my comments. Um, no one cares what I think. It doesn't matter what I think. Doesn't matter what you think. We don't control the situation. We have no influence. But I've said this before. Well, what would happen, John, if oil went to 150? Well, I would sell my oil and gas stocks on the spike because I know eventually this thing would end at some point and then price would come back down. And, I could rebuy these things with 2 or 3 times the amount of capital. Okay. So be forced into becoming a trader, possibly in the short to medium term. Um, the Autumn situation is exactly that. That they get some kind of get in there and just tell the Israelis, we're not going to do this, we can't do it, and then mediate and get it back to, as uh, Vox described it as, the previous low simmering hostility. Okay, that would probably be the optimal outcome. Again, impossible to know. So we wait, we see. We don't control the situation. Doesn't matter what we personally think about it, because no one in DC cares what anybody out here in the hinterlands or the voters think. They respond to money. If you have money and you want to drop it in the sock, then they'll take your calls, they'll eat lunch with you, and they'll listen to you. But other than that, putting cardboard on a stick and marching around or writing letters to the your congressman isn't going to change anything. So there it is. That's it for this week. Again, we'll see what happens. Again, these things, there's always wars and rumors of wars. We just adapt and overcome and move on. These things usually result in trading opportunities, and we'll take advantage of them because our goal here is to make money, to take care of our families, and stay ahead of inflation. So that's what we're going to do. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you.